This is Andy Forbes with Capgemini America, and I'm talking with Joe Vernon, Capgemini America Retail and CPG Transformation Leader,
Hi, Andy. Nice to be here.
and Siva, an Executive Vice President at Antuit AI, where he runs the Forecasting and Digital Supply Chain Group.
Hey, Andy, pleasure to be here.
Consumer products demand forecasting and planning is not going to be the same moving forward. Siva, why do you think this is going to be the case?
The recent events, we saw panic buying and hoarding. We all went to the grocery shop and bought a lot of toilet papers. But this looks like a temporary reaction. When you see the Q1 results, you notice most traditional CPG companies reported an upsurge in sales in the last quarter, particularly online sales. Though the panic buying seems to be short term, some of the shifts in demand trends could be longer. Think about it. Bulk buying versus frequent trips. For next few months, I prefer to go and buy bulk rather than making multiple trips to grocery shop. Cooking versus eating outside. Buying more cleaning and washing products. These kind of trends can be around for longer, and some of these behavioral changes could be permanent. Traditional approach of projecting the past into the future is most certainly inaccurate. Forecasting has to change to accommodate the recent events that we are seeing and the nature of the transition. A more consumer centric approach to forecasting and planning is critical.
Joe, a consumer-centric approach to forecasting planning. What is your view?
Yeah, Siva makes a great point here about knowing the consumer. We want to know what the consumer's moods and preferences are and how they're really shifting, and if they're going to hold steady over a prolonged period. Of course, the buying patterns of recent have been all over the place, but we want to know how much of that is permanent. And the way to do that, we really need to have a conversation with the consumer. What are they doing and saying right now in the present? And if we can know their minds and know what they're doing and saying, we can get a better look into what will influence those buying patterns in the future. So, planning systems need to adopt to what we call a near term and forward looking capability. And that is to use that consumer lens, that consumer sentiment to inform decisions and really understand what's happening in the now and apply that to the future.
Siva, so near-term and forward-looking. What are your thoughts?
Near term and forward looking it is. In a normal world, historical demand is useful for projecting into the future, but the current world we are in, it is not very useful. We see drastic change in demand trends. Traditional approaches like time series to project the past in the future into the future are not very successful, particularly with what we are seeing. Like Joe mentioned, there is a shift in consumer preferences and consumer buying pattern. The ability to translate the past demand into customer and event based preferences is going to offer precious insights into the why of the demand. Why the demand is what it is as important as the demand itself. By knowing the why behind the demand, we can understand what is causing the demand to be what it is. Why are people preferring this product? And by ingesting that into the day to day planning, we get tremendous insights into the buying behavior of our customers that can feed into our supply chain decisions, sales decisions, and pricing decisions. This is where consumption sensing comes to picture. What is consumption sensing? It is about leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning along with external events data and internal data like our pricing and promotion to identify the shift in demand pattern within both short, medium, and long term horizon. By identifying the shift in demand pattern, we can build a more responsive supply chain. Honestly, in today's world, this is table stakes.
Joe, so what's really behind all of this?
Some important elements are social sentiment and trending topics online and other indicators of behavior. We want that new level of sensitivity to the why of consumption and why they're buying differently. And you can gain insights from this data. And the hope is, And what we've been able to show is that you can dynamically modify forecasting models based on this sentiment. And you can do it more frequently, more accuracy. Let me give you an example of what consumption sensing might look like. You want to more closely track what people are choosing and putting in their cart. Of course, we've been doing it in e-com for a long time. But a good example in a store is if you put a sensor in a store on a shelf for a specific item. You might notice that somebody stands in front of that item 1,000 times and then it gets bought 40 times. And the next month, they might stand in front of that item 1,400 times, but they still only buy it 40 times. What accounts for that difference? Was there something about the product's appearance? Was there a news story about this product or about that brand that turned to a negative impression by the consumer? Was there something that made it fall out of favor? That's consumption sensing, consumer sensing. You won't see that in typical point of sale data. You'll still see 40 items sold one month and 40 items sold the next. So that's a good example of trying to understand the why. And Siva mentioned that machine learning is the key here. It can spot those anomalies. And the machine learning can model that, and AI can look for some corroborating activity or news story that might correlate to this drop in conversion and negative impression by the consumer.
Siva, how do we treat the demand during periods of high variability?
If you look at the late March and early April 2020 in the United States, the demand during the peak period of variability is almost unforecastable. No one knew how people were reacting to the news that they are reading day in and day out. However, the period of transition to the new normal is interesting. To Joe's point previously, near term and forward looking, that is where that comes to picture. When you're looking at the period of transition into new normal, you want to be focusing on the closer time horizon and then make your planning process more responsive and focus forward on a shorter term 1 or 2 months at a time. And this needs a combination of art and science. An art where you need people, insights, planners, people who are at the front line filling the shelf, the insights that they have, and science, consumption sensing, AI and ML models, which can take the data, churn it out, corroborate it with the insights that planners can bring in, and then give a forward perspective of the demand. And also, don't forget, some of the demand trends and the shift could be more permanent. So, this is not about just the peak period and the period of transition. There could be some of the shift in trends that could have a more longer term implications of how the supply chain is planned, how the new product introduction works.
Joe, what are 3 takeaways from today's conversation?
Well, it's interesting to note that the main takeaway is that things are going to be different. The new forecasting paradigm needs to heavily rely on this near term and forward looking data inputs and data modeling. And that begins fundamentally with ML enabled demand sensing, consumption sensing solutions that are working from the consumer perspective on back and backward and incorporates external data sets with traditional inventory and point of sale data. This is what you really need to get a better picture of what might be happening in the future, which will then drive other things in your supply chain like more efficient production and buying and replenishment and a very wide breadth of supply chain decisions will benefit from this kind of perspective. And lastly, the foundations for this is having an analytics enabled agile supply chain that can really flex to these demand and have these demand shaping capabilities. When you have these three things, the entire end-to-end supply chain gets leaner and more efficient if you truly understand the consumer.
Joe, Siva, thank you for your insights today. Joe, how can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more?
Thank you, Andy. I can be found on LinkedIn, Joe Vernon, Vernon.
Siva, how can people get in touch with you?
Thank you, Andy. People can reach out to me on my email, siva at antuit.ai, SIVA at antuit.ai.